I'm Julie Grevengoed. I'm the broker here at Clarity, and this is Kevin Kelling. Any words of introduction you want to?
So I'm the mortgage lender, and so that's a key part of this whole process of buying first and selling later. And I have personal experience to add to this, so you'll hear more about that later.
So I have a little outline in front of you there. If I ever miss a blank, feel free to yell at me, but there is a little answer key at the bottom. So you're not tested or anything. We're giving you the answers right up from the top. But, it's just to kind of hopefully help you walk through it with me and take notes. But if you're not a fill-in-the-blank kind of person, feel free to just disregard and use the back of it. But I'm going to start by drawing a little bit on the board. Because what I like to do first is kind of just frame up what we're talking about. So just kind of explain how the purchase process works. And then once we have a timeline, I think we can better understand when you have two timelines going at the same time, what the mechanics of that looks like. Does that make sense? So we're going to start here with look for a house. And then we're going to do, so this is selling, I guess, or sorry, buying. This is buying. So this period of time is unknown. And that's kind of why we're doing a seminar, because that's kind of the cause of stress. Is this is an unknown. How long that's going to take. Then once you're under contract, then we do inspections. You have 10 days to get those done. Then we do the appraisal and the rest of the loan. And I kind of talk about those as separate things, even though they're not. Like getting the appraisal done is a big part of getting the loan finished. But I guess I talk about the appraisal specifically because when you purchase a home, they usually go through. So I don't ever want people to be nervous. Like, I got something under contract, it's probably going to fall apart. No, they usually go through. But if something is going to happen, the pressure points are usually inspections or it doesn't appraise. I mean, things can fall apart for all kinds of reasons from a lending perspective. But hopefully you're pre-approved and they're anticipating issues before you're even under contract. That's why we have somebody like Kevin. It's important to have someone who's thorough on the front end, which doesn't mean that you still can't lose your job or something crazy like that happens. But typically, if you're going to have issues, it's because the value doesn't come in. We're in a market that's going up. So sometimes when appraisers have to look back, so sometimes what we're going to think of as fair market value, meaning what a willing buyer and a willing seller will come together. Fair market value might be something different than appraised value because as the market goes up, people are willing to pay more than what they were historically, right? So this can be an issue. And again, I don't want to scare you like it's a frequent issue, but it does come up sometimes. So that's a pressure point, that's a pressure point. And we're going to close. And then we're going to get possession. This step here can be anywhere 0 to 30 days, typically. Lenders require you to own or occupy within 60 days. So it can drag out, but that's not typical. Typical is 30 days. And then this whole offer to close is about 30 days. So I just kind of wanted you to understand a little bit the timeline, so that then when we kind of superimpose, when you're selling at the same time, your buyer is going to have to go through all these same steps. So this is going to help us answer the question, do we buy first or do we sell first? And what are our options from that perspective? So of course, what would be like a great outcome would be to do both the same day, right? Like if we can have another timeline going and that close is like this, right? Then we're kind of, this is harder to line up. And we'll kind of talk about the pros and cons of if you buy first or you sell first. Really, if you buy first, it's a little bit easier to line that up because things are selling quickly. So if you have something under contract and then put your house on the market and you get an offer in the next few days, then then this might be, here instead of the same day, but you can still pull off that close the same day idea. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but that's just kind of giving you a framework. Now, let's just say that we don't close both the same day. One thing that's going to play into buying first or selling first is you kind of need to make a determination for yourself of what's scarier. 2 houses and 2 payments, right? Or 0 houses and in your in-laws' basement, right? Which one's scarier? And maybe if you have an in-laws' basement to go to, that's great. But maybe you're going to be in a tent at the campground. That's a little different. So, and that's part of what factors into what's scarier, right? Is it the financial burden? Is that scarier? Or is it, we're not sure where we'd go? Is that scarier? So that's part of what we're looking at when we're thinking, what's our risks? So what direction would we go? Now, the other thing that I wanted to give is kind of like a background, and then we'll get deeper into buy first or sell first. But I wanted to explain about contingent offers. People throw this term around, and I understand why they do, but I want to be a little bit more specific because there's really 2 different kinds of contingencies. There's 3 layers of them. One is when you put in an offer, and I'm not talking about all contingencies in this. Let me take a step back. Like there's inspection contingency and financing contingency. So we use this word a lot, but if you just generally say, is this a contingent offer? Usually what people are talking about is it contingent upon the sale of another property. So when you're making an offer, what the seller likes to see, and therefore makes your offer more competitive, is that it's not contingent at all. Because if it is contingent, they are taking on the risk of what we call the underlying transaction. So if you're trying to sell your house and buy one, and you put in an offer where you're not going to buy those unless yours is sold, then the seller is understanding that if something happens to yours, something happens to theirs too. So that just maybe is fine, but know that if you're in a competing offer situation, you're competing against somebody that doesn't have that, you're going to be at a disadvantage. right? So that's part of why I want to talk about that as we talk through this in the zero houses, no houses conversation. The other kind of contingent offer, kind of the next level up, is it's contingent upon the close. So what this means is that you have a house that you need to sell, but it's already under contract. So again, getting back to these pressure points, if you have yours under contract and they've already had their inspections, then yes, there's still a level of risk to the seller, but at least you can go to them and say, listen, yes, it still needs to close, but we've passed the pressure points. So it's not as risky as you might think. That's an easier thing to sell than it just went under contract yesterday. We're kind of hoping it all works out, right? Does that make sense? So the deeper you get into that, to that transaction, the less risk there is for the next party. The third level, and I think I did them in reverse order from your paper, I'm sorry about that, is contingent upon both the sale and the close. This would be, you put an offer in, your house is either not under contract or not even on the market yet. What that is nothing, really. The seller is still able to take any other offer. So if it's contingent upon both the sale and the close, then it's not binding on them at all. So I really discourage people from going that direction unless it's a really like specialty house that we don't think anybody else would like for whatever reason. It can work in special situations, or we can convince sometimes the seller, give us 5 days, something short like that. But they're often not very willing. So what it becomes is a race to the finish line. So we just want to bear that in mind. It really is, if you do have to sell first before you buy, it really is best to have that thing under contract before you're shopping. Otherwise, your offers are effectively meaningless. So just to kind of give you some, and I do want to say, if you ever have questions about anything I'm talking about as I go through, you don't need to wait till the end or anything like that. Go ahead and raise your hand.
Mine's on like a contingent sale, but then you have another contingent sale on the house that's you're selling. I worry about that going pretty deep. Yeah.
You mean like the domino effect?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so the deeper that goes, the riskier it is to all involved, right? If this one over here falls apart and then you have 3 more, that's a thing. That's scary to all of us. So that's kind of part of why Kevin's here, is we're going to talk through some strategies of how to make your offer not contingent, even if you need to sell first. So we'll get into that in just a second, because yeah. So before we get into just the specifics of buy first or sell first, I'd want to talk a little bit about, let's get ready. Whichever one you're doing first, you need to get ready. Because if you're going to buy first, you probably want to get that house on the market like pretty darn quick afterwards, right? If some people it's the same day, some people it's a month later because they really want to move out first. And that's a conversation that you need to have, obviously. But either way, start now doing repairs. I know any one of us is always happy to come out and say, here's the repairs that are going to pay you back. Here's some staging that you can do. Do that as far in advance as you can so you're not under the gun. So you don't find a house and then all of a sudden you have all these repairs to do in your house in a week, right? It's stressful. So the earlier you start, the less stress you have. The other thing that I'd encourage you to do sooner than later is to get pre-approved. Know what your options are. That's a big part of this conversation is, are you even able to buy first without selling? Can your ratios, just meaning your debt to income ratios, like do you make enough money to, on paper, afford 2 houses. And that is going to really guide the conversation of what our options are. So start there. Get pre-approved really early. Have that conversation of, if I sell my house, what price point could I go up to? And if I don't sell my house, what price point I could go up to? And then you know what your options are. And you know where to focus. So selling first. There's opportunities and challenges to both. If you sell first, the thing that's great about that is obviously you have more liquidity. You have the equity from your home, you have all that cash from that. That's great. You can use that as your down payment. The other thing is you know what your equity is. Because that, until you have a buyer, it's a little bit of a wild card. Obviously, we do a market analysis. We get as close as we can. We can usually get pretty close as far as knowing what your value is. But we don't know exactly until the cash is in your hand, really. Because what if you go through inspections and you find out there's mold in your attic and all of a sudden you have a $5,000 remediation? Well, nobody could have seen that coming. And if it's after the fact and you already bought one, and you can't afford for there to be a $5,000 swing, you're in a bad place. And we don't want you in a bad place. So if I'm ever working with somebody and they're buying first, I tend to be pretty conservative as far as what I'm telling them on the selling side, because I just don't want to see you in a bad place. That's common sense, but that's part of what's great about selling first is you know exactly what your cash position is going to be. And then obviously you can usually afford a little bit more because you don't have the other house in your ratios. So just depending what you're trying to accomplish, that may or may not be a big deal to you. Obviously the challenges, the other side of things is if you sell first, you might have to make a double move. In-laws basement. There it is. There's the downside. And short-term housing can be difficult to find. It kind of depends on, if you have 6 kids, it's probably harder than if you are single, for example. The couch will do you if you need a whole house, right? But some strategies that we have people have, they stay with family. You can sometimes find a short-term lease. It's hard, though, if I'm just being real. Most places want a 12-month. So what you can do is just make sure you get a place that has some kind of clause for breaking your lease. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. So it might cost you a month's rent, something like that. But sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, and that's not the end of the world. What's a month rent? $1,000, $1,500, depending on your place, right? Like in the scope of a house, and you can do what you need to do, that's a good strategy. The other challenge, if I'm just moving on to see there, is offers that are contingent are harder to get accepted when you're competing. And we kind of talked about this when we were talking about the definitions. So one thing that you can do is just target homes where you probably won't be competing. If it's been on the market for 1 day, the odds are good you will. But if something's been on the market 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months, you won't. They'll be glad for your offer. Maybe you could even get it a little bit cheaper. Who knows? So that's one thing to do is look at houses that have been on the market a little bit longer. But obviously then the flip side of that is, why has it been on the market a little bit longer, right? So it can limit your choices a little bit for that strategy. But sometimes there's just things that have been overlooked for one reason or the other. Honestly, sometimes a big reason why things are on the market too long is they just started overpriced. And then you're chasing the market. And it doesn't take long to look old and what's wrong with it in a market that's hot. So if they started overpriced and they sit for 2 weeks, then already people are thinking what's wrong with it. So that is a great opportunity. Don't turn away from things just because they've been on the market a couple weeks. The The other thing that we can do is, give them extended possession period after closing. Make your terms really attractive. There's other things that are important to the seller besides just price. So if we can give them other things that they like, that's one way to deal with that. Okay, buying first. And I'm flying through things a little bit because I think everybody will have a lot of questions for Kevin. So I'm trying to save him time. So buying first, if you're going the other way, we talked about selling first, but what if you buy first? The opportunity is it gives you more freedom in looking for that next house, right? Like if you've already sold your house, then it's like, go, 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 we're going to be homeless, find a house. This one's good, right? But if you haven't, then you have a little bit more where you can and be a little pickier and not be under the gun, which is a good thing and a bad thing in a way. Sometimes people need a little bit of a push, and that's the push. If you're the person that thrives under pressure and you need a deadline, sell your house first. But if that's not you, maybe buy one first, and it just gives you a little bit of time to think about things, make sure you get that right house. The other thing that's really great about buying first, and just happenstance in my life, I've always done this, our last two houses, and what's really great about it is, like, we lived in a bi-level house, and it had almost no storage, had like this much around the furnace kind of thing, that was not an attractive feature to buyers. So what was great is we had moved already, and so that storage room looked a lot bigger without anything in it. So that was great. Like it made the house feel a lot roomier that we were able to move out and kind of declutter. I don't necessarily recommend getting everything out. It depends on your situation, whatever. Of course, this is just blanket. There's kind of like a continuum of where your house looks the best. Cluttered is probably like the worst. And then completely vacant, what happens is people's eye is drawn towards the nick in the wall, the stain on the carpet. Whereas if you have some couches and a coffee table, not as much. But having said that, vacant and noticing nicks in the wall is better than over the top cluttered. Does that make sense? So you got to do what's right for you. And obviously, if you move, you probably want your furniture. So it's not the end of the world, but just word advice. But that's one of the great things about buying first is you can declutter the house, at least clear out your storage, get your garage empty, that kind of thing. The challenge to buying first is, of course, financing is a little bit harder to qualify because of your ratios and your reserve requirements. And again, like we talked about on the other side, is what was a positive in selling first is a negative in buying first, that you don't know the exact amount of equity that you have. So you got to plan on a little bit of a cushion there. And you don't have that cash quite yet. Now we're going to talk about if you get the cash later, there are ways that you can still put that down on the new house. But, it's just that one extra step. So solutions. Go for a slightly longer close date. So if your next house, you think your house is going to sell fairly quickly, buy that next house, get it under contract. If you're ready, be ready, get your house on the market immediately. If you did like a 40-day close in your offer for the next house and you get your house on the market pretty quick, there's a pretty good likelihood that we're going to be able to line those two up. So being able to qualify on paper for two houses so that you can make a non-contingent offer, again, assuming marketability of your house, which in the market we're in is most houses, there's a pretty high likelihood that we're closing both the same day and that you won't have to tap into retirement funds or borrowing from mom and dad or line of credit on your house or any of the things that we're going to talk about in a minute. If you do end up closing on the one you're buying first, one thing that they can do is take the equity from your house, and I'm sure Kevin's going to go into more detail about this, but we call it recasting. You take that lump sum afterwards and put it onto the new house. You can just do this once, but they re-amortize your loan so your payments go down. Because normally if you just kind of make an extra payment, it doesn't do anything. It just pays it off earlier. But in recasting, you take a big chunk and you put it down and they'll refigure your payments. So that's kind of a way to get through that. So I'm going to let Kevin talk about things from the financing standpoint because that plays a really big role in your source of funds and if you're able to, what your options are. But before I hand it over, does anybody have any questions for me on anything that we've talked about so far? Okay, just checking. Sure.
I'm sorry, young people, we don't have a mortgage.
Good, yay.
So we've been there 58, going on 59 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So ours will be sold for cash, right?
Yeah, so what I've had people in your situation do is, well, Kevin will talk more about it. Maybe I can let him chime in now. But do a home equity line of credit, and so that you can buy first, right? And then whenever your house sells, pay it off. And then you're still in that same position, but you had access to the cash in the meantime. But the little trick with that to know is get the home equity line before your house is on the market, because they won't do it for a house that's for sale. So if that's what you are wanting to do is a home equity line of credit to access your equity for your down payment, just make sure that that's in place. That would be part of why I tell you get pre-approved and talk to a lender before you get into this whole process, because that would be part of our planning. Okay, take it away.
I think it was December 10th. My wife and I asked Julie to come over, and we were talking about executing this very strategy. What would this look like if we were going to buy a house and then sell later? And we actually, my mother-in-law's home is in an estate. We're trying to sell that. We're like, let's get the proceeds from that, money from the estate, and then we'll go buy the next place. And so December 10th, of course, we got signed up on Julie's portal, and I'm sure Ian or whoever you're working with will do that, and you start seeing places. Well, that'd be kind of fun to go see that place. And so the first week of January, we started looking at places, and I talked to my wife, and I talked to Jenny, and I was like, okay, so here's the reality is we can do this. It doesn't feel right because it feels way overextended. But we have a very marketable home near Aquinas College. It's the hot neighborhood where everybody wants to be. So I said, it's very doable that we can do this sort of thing. And so after a couple days, she was like, okay, I think I'm okay with this now. So what we had done is we had opened up a home equity line of credit on our house so that we could write the check for the next place and do a smaller down payment, and then we're going to pay it down later. So we're in the middle of that process right now. So we bought a place in January. It was clear to close in 10 days. We were moved in less than 30 days after we bought the house. Kind of a whirlwind. And then we were just like, well, we're done. I was like, oh, whoops, we have to sell this other place. So, so that's our challenge right now, is to stay engaged and focused to get that done. So let's go back to So that's my personal story of how this is working out for us, but let's talk about the specifics here. Would I qualify for a loan if I buy first? And debt to income ratio is the key thing. How much money do you make can you qualify with 2 mortgages is really the key question.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
please.
So the home equity line of credit you're using for your down payment on a new mortgage, is that
That's one strategy.
okay.
The advantage of a home equity line of credit is an interest-only loan. So when you're getting approved on your new home, that's a smaller payment on an interest-only loan. Now, with Mercantile Bank, we'll actually do the home equity line of credit even if your home's listed for sale. Of course, we want to help you with the financing on the next one too, so keep that in mind. But that is helpful. So if you're a little bit tight on how much your income and debt ratios are, that's a great strategy. You want to execute it ahead of time. That's the best way. So if you know in 60 days we're going to be going through this process, open it up then, because you can also get more money available to you as well. So I'll do a home equity line of credit for you, but we're going to limit it. If we know you're selling, we're going to limit how much we'll give you on that particular loan product.
So is there an advantage there? I'm sorry, this is not an area I'm very strong in. So is there an advantage there in using the home equity line of credit versus having the savings? Would you want to combine the two? Would you, if you could afford the, say, 20% on the new mortgage without the home equity line of credit, would that be better? Or
it's what you want to do. Clearly, if you don't need to borrow the money, that's a great way to go. Because there is an interest cost. Even if it's interest only, it's costing you some money, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
maybe if you were, say you had enough savings to get you to 15% down, but a home equity line could get you to 20, and then you wouldn't have PMI right off the bat.
Exactly.
Then you sort of have a situation where you're weighing the benefits of each.
Yep.
That pieces are starting to fit together.
Good, yeah.
What if you already have a home equity line of credit?
Beautiful. Is it maxed out? Do you have room on it or availability?
I think so, because we got it to do repairs on that.
Yeah. And it's also possible it's going up in value. So sometimes a home equity line of credit is a very inexpensive loan to get. It's not like a regular mortgage. It's $200-300 if you don't need an appraisal. So if you've done the repairs, value's gone up, you could also look at rewriting that to give you a little bit more room.
Interest is determined differently in a HELOC too, isn't it?
Yes. So it's a variable rate mortgage. That rate will move around. Now, right now, it's probably going to go down, but it's not fixed rate. The reason it's a great solution is it's not the long-term solution for you. So if you're selling, you know that in 90 days, it kind of doesn't matter what the interest rate does. It'll move around a little bit, but it doesn't really matter. If you're going to hold that for 30 years, you have no idea what that's going to look like over 30 years. That's a different thing.
We do not need an appraisal for the HELOC.
So we run an automated valuation. And if your property, typically in the city, we often will get an automated valuation hit. It's called Home Value Explorer is what we use. And if it comes in with a high enough confidence score, then we don't need an appraisal. It usually will come in lower than what an appraisal would be, but avoiding the $450 cost is advantageous. Okay, back to the outline. Now, I'm happy for the set. Julie, I talked about this. We figured that this would be the place where the questions would pop up. So number 1, debt to income ratios and cash reserves. So you identified the cash reserves. If you have that on hand, that can take the place. As long as you can qualify, you can just take your own money, put the down payment on the next place, and you don't need a home equity line of credit. That's a great solution as well. Alternative down payment options, we've been talking about the home equity line of credit. I think the rate right now, just to give you perspective, I think it's 4.75, but the Federal Reserve dropped the rates today.
and that typically affects short-term variable rate, so it's probably lower now. But it's quite a bit more expensive than your conventional financing, so that's why it's a great short-term solution. It's not a great long-term solution. Mortgage rates now are under 3.5%. It's just crazy low right now. The 401k loan, that's another option. You would want to investigate. Just because you have a 401k doesn't mean you get to borrow against it to go buy a home. So you want to investigate. Some plans allow it, some don't. Different types of, I think a Roth, you have some more flexibility, but you really want to vet that out with your employer plan or wherever that is if you want to utilize that. Do you have anything to add to that?
Some 401k plans, even if they don't allow a loan, will allow you to take money out for a home purchase. I don't know if you'd have the IRS penalties and whatever then, but they'll allow it. But the reason I had a client that bought first, and then we ended up closing both the same day. And they didn't want to tap into the retirement funds, but that was a great vehicle for them to, I keep saying qualify on paper. Like, we have a pretty good degree of confidence that we'll close both the same day. You'll get your home sold quickly, but you never know. Heaven forbid your buyer loses their job or something crazy, buys a boat when they weren't supposed to, something like that.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to buy the house, even if yours, something happens. But, so they had as their backup plan that they could take the 401k loan.
Mm-hmm.
So it did the job for them to qualify on paper so that they could buy first. But then we did close both the same day. They were able to use the equity from their home as the down payment on the next. But it just helped them to have the liquidity to look the part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gift funds are also available in most situations. So as long as it's your primary residence, that's usually allowable. So, it's a great time to be, nice to your grandparents or your parents and make sure you have their favor if you're going to ask for such a thing. On conventional financing, it's pretty easy for documentation. They transfer the money to you, they sign a gift letter, we're done. That's about all they need.
Is there a maximum amount on the gift?
There isn't, but there can be tax ramifications for the gifter. So that would be the one thing to keep in mind for them. From my perspective, it doesn't matter. Certain types of transactions, like if you're buying a second home, you have to have 5% of your own money that's not gifted. So there's weird little quirky rules like that.
And does that have to be it has to be a parent, family member, etc., or can a gift loan be
Can I gift non-literate?
No, it typically has to be a related person.
And what is the terminology for related, I guess?
Well, it's not always precise. It's real simple if it's grandparent, parent. I'm trying to think if I have had one where it was like an uncle or an aunt. There are rules around it, and it would be something I would need to research to know precisely.
What about significant other, even though you're not married?
Fiancé, yes, for sure. And I have run into that other circumstance, and now I don't remember where that landed. I think it was okay as long as we could document they were living together, but it's a little less of a slam dunk. You've got to be more careful in the documentation.
What if you can get the money in there 3 months prior to this?
Oh, there's, yeah.
And you don't care, you just want 2 months prior.
Yeah. So do you understand what she's talking about? So,
if you're gonna slide me cash, let's do it 90 days in advance, because they don't care who you are. Because they just wanna see it
Yeah,
within
if it's just
their-
been in your,
yeah.
This prior to statement.
So I can give Julie $10,000 tomorrow, and then in 6 months she wants to use that money to go buy a house. As a lender, I don't look back at her statements going back that far. At most, I typically look at 2 months. But just think about that. So if
You have
you,
a really good trust relationship.
Yeah.
with that
yeah. But keep in mind, if you put that in January, what's the first date that it's seasoned long enough where I'm not going to see it as the lender, right? So you've got to think that through. Well, there will be the January statement, so you've got to space that out. So I don't recommend that, but it is a
I'm
lot.
gonna say it.
But
if you do
if it's
think through it analytically and do
if-
a little legwork, it can work out.
yeah, if the money's there at that point, I don't know and I don't care, right?
Nobody filed the Patriot Act. Everything was clear in 2 months, there's
Yeah.
no outstanding checks, there's no.
Yep, it's true.
The money's there.
Yeah.
Sure it's there.
Don't tell the IRS, you don't know.
Just keep it under 10%. Nobody's gonna report you.
Unsecured loans, not allowed. Had a client do that recently, trying to unsecured loan. So you can go and get
Don't take cash advance on your credit card.
yeah, stuff like that.
Most things you learn it in how to invest in real estate seminars. Don't do it.
If I'm giving my nephew a loan, is there maximum I can charge?
Loans are typically not allowed for down payment.
I don't know if I can have cash, but
That's why they make them do a gift letter.
Yeah.
Because it's supposed to be like a
Yeah.
legit gift. Even like my husband borrowed money from his grandpa when he bought his first house. And they felt really weird about a gift letter because his grandpa's like, well, you're going to pay me back, right? Like, yeah, I promise.
Yeah.
But technically it's a gift. So there's no lien, there's none of that stuff. It's just a trust relationship that you have with that person who's gifting it.
Yep, in my world, it needs to be a gift. If you decide to do something later, that's a different issue. Recasting is the next one, number 3. What recasting is what my wife and I are anticipating doing very soon. So now that we've got the repair person in, they're getting the house ready, we've committed a date to Julie where we're actually going to be ready. So we committed ourselves. We're going to sell the house. We're going to have some equity. We're going to take that equity and we're going to pay down the mortgage on our new place that we bought. So we did a small down payment of 5%. So we have PMI, got an escrow account, got the whole thing. What's going to happen is we'll take the equity from our house, we'll pay the loan down enough so that we have the 20% equity and we can get rid of the PMI. In my world, you've got 120 days from the day that the appraisal is done on the new house to the day you pay it down so that the recast is kind of an automatic thing. If you go beyond that 120-day window, well, then that appraisal is no longer, quote, good, and then that becomes problematic as far as getting rid of the PMI. So you do need to keep it on a short-term basis for that to work. But you can, so you would pay it down to 80% beyond the 120 days, but then we might actually need a new appraisal, which seems silly, but that's kind of how the rules work. So just keep that window of time in mind.
So then it becomes more like a refi.
Yes. So recasting allows you to re-amortize the payment, so our payment will go down based upon the lower loan balance. Obviously, we'll get rid of the PMI as well. So that's why you do it. I think we charge a couple $100 because there is some processing and you're doing a modification of the loan, but it's not a new refinance.
Is that the same conventional and FHA?
It's true for conventional. FHA, it is all dependent upon who is the loan servicer as far as what they will allow. And I don't know the answer on FHA. It's typically not an issue that comes up on an FHA.
Because you can't have two, right?
You
So
can't
if you're
have two.
selling a house that has an FHA loan,
Correct.
you can't use FHA when you purchase.
Correct. And most people that are buying that have a conventional loan are not utilizing FHA funds. So that's an atypical situation. And if you're getting an FHA financing, you don't just get rid of PMI either. That's a whole different world of getting rid of PMI.
Well, just learned, that if you put 10% down and you close your FHA, it'll drop off in 11 years.
Yes,
I
you can
used to
get,
think it was all, like it was just, you never got rid of it.
true. If you do less than 10% down, you have mortgage insurance for the life of the loan. So that's a drawback of the FHA. So I'm typically always looking first at the conventional option to see if that's the best option. But I just worked with a client yesterday, and turns out due to credit score and a variety of issues and wanted to really minimize their out-of-pocket, FHA was the right solution. So it really depends on the circumstance.
We just looked at a situation where conventional would have been 3.875 and FHA was 2.75. Total.
Yeah.
You don't usually see that where it's.
Yeah, and right now rates are kind of all over the place. But yeah, credit score, conventional financing, if your credit score drops below that 700 mark, you're usually eligible, but the rate can get bumped up. So it depends.
And BA is the same where you can't have two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Veterans loan,
Yeah.
which are awesome. But if you already own a house with a VA loan,
Mm-hmm.
which is too bad because it's 0 down, so that would be a great second loan to have.
Yep. Yeah, and you can't use it on an investment property either. I was telling a veteran that
Even if you own or occupy?
if you own or occupy, it's okay, but not if it's
If
an
it's
just an investment property. And finally, the bridge loan, number 4 there. The bridge loan is a lot like the home equity line of credit. It's just you get to take a bigger chunk of your equity out. So we will go up to 85% of the value of your home. This is usually my last option. If you need all of that equity pulled out, it's a great option. But it's the last option for me, for you, because it's the most expensive option. Sometimes I don't always need an appraisal, but sometimes I'll need an appraisal. You've got full title charges. So the preferable solution is earlier in the process, getting that home equity line of credit in line. Sometimes the lenders will go up to 90% of the value of your home. So that's usually a better solution. The home equity line of credit is acting like a bridge loan. But at the same time, the bridge loan can be the right solution. It too is an interest-only loan. We're going to pay off any liens on your property. It stays consistent payment for the first year, and then it can start changing after that. So it gives you some stability if your timeline's a little longer and you're not comfortable with the line of credit. But it is a solution that a lot of people utilize to be able to do this very thing, buy first and sell later.
Now, in the old days, a bridge loan, correct me if I'm wrong, but a bridge loan was one loan that like bought the new house, they paid off the old house, and then you're paying interest only on the two, right? But that's not, so I think sometimes people still have that image in their head of what a bridge loan looks like.
Right.
But that's not what it is.
Correct. In my mind, what you're talking about is called a blanket loan. It's one loan that blankets both properties. A bridge loan is taking equity out of the one and then putting it onto the next one.
So blanket loans exist or they don't?
They do. We used to offer them. We don't do them now. It typically is not a really preferred solution for most people. If you're buying a home, or if you're refinancing, so if you're doing this on the blanket loan, if you close on the refinance of your home, there's a 3-day waiting period to get your money. So it really gets complicated lining those 2 days up if you're trying to purchase at the same time.